Okay, everyone, welcome to part one of this discussion, the full story behind the Assyrian dispersion of Jews. I'm covering this now as a follow-up to what we just talked about in the last couple videos, the 12 tribe dispersion thing. Uh, there needed to be a deeper dive into this matter to settle it once and for all. What exactly did happen um, with the Assyrians? Was there a Jewish dispersion? And if there was, what was behind it? What exactly did happen? Again, we can't nail down 10 actual tribes like everything else in Jewland. There's so much mythologizing. But when we look at the historical record and the biblical record, we find that the two somewhat complement each other. As always, the Bible is complete horseshit 99% of the time. But it shouldn't be entirely disregarded, right? Because there actually are some very tantalizing bits and pieces scattered throughout the damn text that do, on occasion, provide some important, missing pieces of the puzzle um, that do tie in with the known historical record, give us some interesting background. Sometimes very damning background as far as the tribe is concerned, which is most ironic. The Bible does not always favor the tribal position. Often it puts them in a bad position. And one of the reasons for that is the priesthood would often condemn the children of Israel for, crap that they fucked up on, or the royal bloodline if they were on good standing with them and they screwed up. They would blame it on the children of Israel by having God rebuke them, and also to explain why things weren't going right for them. They would say, "Oh, God is cursing us because we're not following." That would be brownie points for the priesthood. You're not following Yahweh, so you're going to do what Yahweh says, i.e., what the priests say. Um, but in any case, yeah, very often the Bible doesn't put them in a very good light. We'll look at, we already have on other videos I've done, but we'll look at some more examples of that down the line. But anyway, let's look at this part of history more clearly because we're going to get some more interesting insights into our little tribal buddies. So, yeah, let's do that. Let's take a look at the Assyrian conquest of Israel in the 8th century. And we're going to see that not just in the biblical record, but there is a record outside the Bible, a historical record that actually dovetails somewhat with the biblical record. According to mainstream historians, Israel is recorded as having paid tribute to the Assyrians as early as 841 BC as a vassal kingdom. And when I say mainstream historians, they're all in agreement, even the secular historians, because there are extra biblical corroborations of this, as we'll see. This was during the reign of King Shalmaneser III, who had recorded this Israelite tribute on his famous black obelisk. There's an inscription thereon that actually mentions Israel or the Israelites. This obelisk also depicts the Israelite king Jehu, mentioned in the Old Testament, as bowing before the Assyrian king in submission. And oh, what a sight that is. Anyway, there's an accompanying inscription with this obelisk that reads, quote, "The tribute of Jehu of the land of Omri, silver, gold bowls, vessels of gold, goblets of gold, pitchers of gold, lead, scepters for the king's hand, and staves I received. This is the Assyrian king talking, naming all of the idols, the items that he received as tribute from this King Jehu. So, Bible dupes get all excited over this. Oh, see, it not only mentions the Israelites on this Assyrian tablet, but it mentions an actual king referred to in the Old Testament. That proves the Bible. Ah, shut up. It doesn't prove jack diddle shit. It just proves that that particular individual with that name actually did exist. Does it prove the stories around him? No. Any more than finding, a record from back in the 70s when the Spider-Man comics were really big, of a city called New York, proves that the Spider-Man comic books are true. Knock it off. God almighty. But anyways, here the Israelite king, or tribal chieftain is more like it, was forced to pay tribute to this Assyrian king, something they never have liked. Doesn't matter where they were, doesn't matter how much the suzerain lord kissed their ass and bent over backwards for them. Whenever they were vassals having to pay taxes, they not only didn't like it, but they seized on every opportunity to free themselves from having to pay tribute, right? Oh, they don't have a problem when they seize power, inflicting others with tribute and very outrageous, unsurmountable tribute. But they don't want to, that's what the whole first century insurrectionist movement was all about, right? Of course, there were other aims, they wanted to take over Rome and rule the world themselves, and they wanted them kicked out of Jerusalem. But that was a big instigative factor, that they were, having to pay tax. And that's what got most of the rabble allied behind these insurrectionists, was the promise of, being tax-free. Anyway, boy, these were the good old days, though. This king didn't kiss their ass. He demanded tribute and would not accept no for an answer. But as you might guess, it wasn't long before the chosen ones rebelled against paying such tribute under Israel's king Hoshea. And we read about this in 2 Kings 17, verses 3-6, which says, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up to attack Hoshea, who had been Shalmaneser's vassal, and had paid him tribute. But the king of Assyria discovered that Hoshea was a traitor, for he had sent envoys to the king of Egypt, and he no longer paid tribute to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore, Shalmaneser seized him and put him in prison. The king of Assyria invaded the entire land, marched against Samaria, and laid siege to it for 3 years. This sounds actually pretty historically accurate, what actually went on. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Hala, in Gozan, on the Harbor River, and in the towns of the Medes. The Medes and the Persians had teamed up during the Persian Empire. Anyway, so again, that's 2 Kings 17, 3-6. Notice how this passage admitted that the Assyrians overtook Hoshea because he was a, quote, traitor who refused to pay tribute. So, this doesn't put the Zios in very good light, right? But the reason for that is, and I'll be delving into this after this series, another couple videos down the line, when I would talk about, the infighting, right? The priestly line didn't want a king. And so this wasn't too far into the monarchical period, quote unquote. They were really tribal chieftains. They weren't frickin' kings. But nevertheless, they didn't want this type of authority ruling in Jewland. They just wanted to be the rulers themselves, the priests. So very often you see this in so-called Holy Writ, where the priests are denouncing the kings and blaming them all the time for shit. Sometimes they worked together with the kings on occasion, but for the most part, they couldn't stand them. So they would always blame the kings so that they would look good and people would be more likely to listen to them. Anyway, I'll get into that more as we go along. In verses 6 to 18 of this same chapter that we just read from, the reason for the success of the Assyrians over the Chosenites is given that the chosen ones were rebellious against Yahweh. I'm sorry, I meant to say the reason for the success of the Assyrians over the Chosenites. That's the reason given. They were rebellious against Yahweh, and so that's why the king of Assyria was able to march in and overtake them. Had they listened to Yahweh, had they been obedient, good little boys and girls, this wouldn't have happened. The Bible's loaded with shit like this over and over and over again. Every time they fucked up, God's punishing us. When something went right, they followed the plan to a T and were able to rip off this, that, or the other, king or kingdom. Then God was blessing them. Anyway, here's how this passage reads. In the 9th year of the reign of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and exiled the Israelites to Assyria. And he settled them in Hala at the river Habor, near the river Gozan, and in the cities of Media. And so it was that the Israelites had sinned against the Lord their God. So there you go. That's why this happened, you see. They fell because they sinned against the Lord. They worshipped other gods and followed the customs of the nations, the heathen, the Assyrians particularly. So shame on them for not following the only true God, the mass-murdering psychopath who sends fire down to roast your ass if you don't do exactly whatever the arbitrary command is that he gave in any given moment. That prick there. Yeah, the only true God. Anyway, so this is why they went into captivity, supposedly. When the truth is, they went into captivity because they weren't fucking paying taxes. We just saw that, their precious king there, their tribal chieftain, was found to be a traitor. That's the real reason. But nope. The Holy Writ goes on to say it was punishment because of worshiping other gods. You see their little excuse bullshit? I mean, the very text that makes the claim that they went into, captivity, that they were raided by the Assyrians, the very text that says it was because they were rebelling, a few verses previous, it says the real reason, that it was because they weren't paying taxes. The king, the chieftain, was a traitor. You got to love it, man. The contradiction is right there. But yet, this is how the book works. And Bible dupes way back then, just like Bible dupes today, don't even catch it, even though sometimes within the same verse you have contradictions like this. It just goes right by them. By the way, as a very interesting side note, and as another example of what I was just saying a few moments ago, how the Bible very often doesn't put uh, the little tribalites in a very good light. But, in this case, the reason is this was the priestly bloodline making the kingly bloodline look bad. Well, they didn't have to do much to do that. The kingly line was already doing, crazy shit, right? So were the priestly, so was the priestly bloodline. But it was the priestly bloodline, the old saying, the winners write history, right? They were the ones writing the sacred text, not the royal bloodline. So you don't hear much bad talk about the priestly bloodline in the Not So Holy book, but you hear a lot of bad things about the kingly bloodline. So here's one example. And I have no reason whatsoever, neither should any of the rest of us have any reason to doubt the veracity of this particular passage. Check this out. 2 Kings 15:30 tells us how this sleazebag Hoshea had actually come to power. It says, then Hoshea, son of Elah, conspired against the Israelite king Pekah, the one that had preceded him, son of Remaliah. He attacked and assassinated him and then succeeded him as king. Right there in the Not So Holy book, we discover that Hoshea became king by assassinating his predecessor and seizing power. So there you go, classic infighting. Not only was there infighting between the priestly and the royal bloodlines, right? But sometimes right within the various factions, there was rivalry. And here we can see that right within the royal bloodline. Hoshea killed Pekah so that he could become king. Classic. Anyway, no surprise, shortly after this time, under King Shamshi Adad V, a civil war erupted in Assyria in 824 BC. Do you suppose there was any connection with the heebie-jeebies here? Civil freaking war. They have always been the orchestrators behind the scenes of civil wars, uprisings, insurrections, revolutions, right? And this was right at a time when, they were rebelling, having to pay taxes. They were under tribute to the Assyrians. You don't think they were behind that? Oh, you can bet your sweet ass they were. Anyway, as time went on, by the mid 8th century BC, Israel was still liable for paying taxes to Assyria. So guess what happened next? In 746 BC, the Assyrian king Ashur-nirari V was deposed in a palace coup, at which time Tiglath Pileser III had assumed the throne. You gonna tell me you don't see the pattern here? Guess who obviously was behind that? Still having to pay taxes, right? So they orchestrated this whole fiasco. It was hoped that getting rid of the previous king, that the new one would bring about change, things would look more in their favor, but this was not to be the case. This king exacted tribute from the Chosenites as well. This king recorded this inscription that describes tribute that he extracted at the time from the Hebes. Again, this is an actual Assyrian inscription. It states, I received in tribute from Manahem of Samaria. I received tribute from Jubazi or Ahaz of Judah. Um, Gehazi is the Assyrian equivalent of Ahaz. This has been established definitively. Ahaz is yet another tribal chieftain or quote king, nod nod wink wink, mentioned in the Old Testament. So we can see, here again, historical corroboration somewhat of what the biblical text relates. But again, the Chosenites weren't getting in trouble because they were rebelling against Yahweh. It's because they were being fucking pains in the ass as always. Sleazy criminal fucks who didn't want to have to pay tax like everyone else. They wanted special treatment, you see. Jewish exceptionalism. Paying tribute is for the Goyim. Literally. It's always been their attitude, guys. But these Assyrian kings weren't playing along with the gag. Anyway, here's the Old Testament reckoning of this Assyrian inscription we just read from 2 Kings 15, verse 19. It says, then Pul, or Tiglath-Pileser that we just read about, king of Assyria, had invaded the land, Jewland, and Menachem, king of Israel, had given him 1,000 talents of silver to gain his support and to strengthen his own hold on the kingdom. So we see corroboration here between, in this particular instance, between the biblical record and the actual historical record from this Assyrian king's own inscription. So, these events did occur. Meanwhile, as we discover from the biblical record, Ahaz, the king or tribal chieftain of Judah, was kissing up to Tiglath, hoping to be able to manipulate him or win favor from him, get out of paying taxes, whatever. This is recorded in 2 Kings 16, verses 7 and 8, which says, Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and Ahaz took silver and gold found in the temple of the Lord and in the treasuries of the royal palace, and sent it as a gift to the king of Assyria. So here again we see tribute, but it was hoped that maybe this time they could win him over and gain special concessions and exemptions, Before long, King Sargon II was in power, who reigned from 722 to 705 BC. Within a year after assuming the throne, there was, can you guess, a Hebrew-led uprising that took place in Samaria. Do you see, guys, how constantly, again and again and again and again, they never fucking quit, do they? They never fucking quit. They were wanting to send a message that we need to be tax exempt. You can charge everyone else under your authority, but not us. We are to get special concessions. An inscription at the palace of Sargon II in Khorsabad tells us how this king had handled this uprising. It says, this is himself speaking in the first person, I besieged and occupied the town of Samaria and took 27,280 of its inhabitants captive. I took from them 50 chariots, but left them the rest of their belongings. I placed my lieutenants over them. I renewed the obligation imposed upon them by one of the kings who preceded me. So he wasn't backing down. He wasn't bending. And this was really enraging the Chosenites, right? This same inscription further went on to describe another uprising that went on in Syria, led out by a man named Jobid, who most likely was a Syrian Jew. Anyway, here's how this inscription reads. Jobed of Hamath, a smith, was not the legitimate master of the throne. He was an infidel and an impious man, and he had coveted the royalty of Hanath. Notice, impious man, that would mean a true Jew, right? Because to the Assyrians, to to all of the pagan surrounding cultures, they were the ones that were impious, right? Because of all the heinous, criminal activities that they were involved in, the uprisings, the refusal to pay taxes. They were showing themselves as not being pious, right? And yet all the while, don't forget, the Not So Holy book labeled the Goyim as being vile and evil and profane. But these very vile, evil, profane heathen viewed them as profane. Gee, which side do you think got it right? Anyway, the inscription went on to say that this same scumbag, obviously a Jew, decided to rise up against me and prepared for battle. I counted all of the troops of the god Ashur in the town of Karkar, which had declared itself for the rebel, or, in favor of this rebel. In other words, he was doing a census to see how many men he needed to overthrow this uprising. I besieged him and his warriors, he said, and I occupied Karkar and reduced it to ashes. I took him himself and had him flayed, and I killed the chief of the rioters in each town and reduced them to a heap of ruins. He flayed the son of a bitch. Again, guys, this is a Jewish rebel rouser, right? Trying to engage in an uprising once again to overthrow this king because they couldn't get him to make them tax exempt. And so how did this king handle it? He conquered his men, burnt the town, and had this son of a bitch flayed. Yeah, that's how you do it. Of course, did it matter? Did it change these bastards? Did they realize the error of their ways? No. You got to take them all out, guys. You have to. They will never stop. They haven't stopped for 3,500 plus fucking years. You have to thoroughly cut the head of the snake off completely. And then you got to watch the rest of the body, the headless body, to make sure there's no chance of it resurrecting itself. But the entire head has to be cut off. You don't just get rid of one. Oh, no. Him and all of his minions, his sidekicks, the whole kit and caboodle. Anyway, the inscription goes on to say, I recruited my forces with 200 chariots and 600 horsemen from among the inhabitants of the country of Hanath and added them to my empire. So there you go. He did what he thought was a thorough job. He did get rid of the main instigator, but, he didn't get the whole head. He only got one hair off the head of the beast. Here's the biblical account of this very battle here, as found in Isaiah 20, verse 1. In that year, 721 BC, the supreme commander sent by Sargon, king of Assyria, came to Ashdod and attacked and captured it. So again, we find that, in this particular instance, the biblical record is pretty accurate. It's right in line with the ancient Assyrian inscriptions we've been looking at. And so this is how the Assyrians, through Sargon, had kicked Israel's ass, robbed them of their independence, and subjugated them, conquered them. All hail King Sargon. But notice the reason, once again, that the Bible gives for this conquest of Sargon. It wasn't because they were rebels, trying to launch an insurrection, refusing to pay taxes, just being all around criminal fucking pricks. No, no. Says the biblical record. Uh, and again, this was designed by the priests to get the average Jews rallied behind the corrupt elite Jew cause by getting them to think that, oh, the only reason we failed is because we weren't following God. You weren't obeying the priests, in other words. Obey the priests. Let them be your masters. Forget what the royal bloodline is saying. Follow the priests, i.e. Yahweh, and this won't happen to you again. Always, always, it was the people's fault for not following Yahweh. This is how the priest would, get control over the Jewish masses. But anyway, here's how it's worded in 2 Kings 18, 11, and 12. It says, "And the king of Assyria did carry away Israel into Assyria, because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord their God." There you go. That's the reason. Not because they were twisted, evil, criminal fucks, right? That refused to pay taxes, that were constantly launching insurrections to overthrow the government. No, it's because they weren't following the Lord their God. Again and again, guys, this is the shit the Bible dishes out. But instead, they transgressed his covenant, and all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded them, and would not hear the Lord's words, nor do them. They wouldn't hear or do or follow the word of the Lord. So this is the Bible's explanation for all of this. What a crock of shit. Anyway, guys, rather short video, but I'm going to stop there because the next section is pretty lengthy. It's going to take us well beyond the hour mark, I'm sure. So I'll do a full hour video for part 2. Also, my eyes are kind of getting tired, so I'm going to take a break here. But anyway, guys, thanks for joining me. We'll catch you in part 2. Take care.